Hello and welcome to this self-care event. This is jointly hosted by Caritas Westminster and the Irish Chaplaincy. Today we're really fortunate to have Nikki join us. So Nikki Dhillon Keane is a therapist, trainer and activist who works with survivors of domestic abuse and sexual violence in a variety of settings. She also works with Caritas Westminster, running the Signs of Hope Deaf Counselling Service and developing work with survivors of domestic abuse, and with the Bishops' Conference of England and Wales as a domestic abuse advisor. Nikki is co-founder of the Faith and Violence Against Women and Girls Coalition, an associate lecturer at St Mary's University, and works with the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy Good Practice Department. She is the author of Domestic Abuse in Church Communities, a Safe Pastoral Response. Without further ado, let me welcome Nikki to the stage. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mariel. It's really fantastic to be here. Before we start, I'm just going to have a little talk about how to create a safe space for us all here tonight. And the first thing I'm sure you're familiar with is, obviously the material that I'm going to be talking about, feel free to share far and wide. But if we're sharing any personal stuff, if we just agree to keep that confidential as a group. And, you know, some of this information can be triggering for some people. We're talking about looking after ourselves, and we have to look after ourselves while we're talking about looking after ourselves. So if you do find the material triggering, just, you know, feel free to switch your camera off. As we said, it's being recorded, so you can, you know, come back to it later if you need to step away and look after yourself. And also just be aware when we're discussing things that even if the material is really comfortable for you, it might not be for everybody, and so be aware that other people might find the material triggering. And I believe that there is going to be information at the end, is that right, Mariel, about helplines and support that's available. So, okay, I'm just going to plow on because we don't have a lot of time, and I tend to talk a lot, so I'm going to try and be quick. There will be, I think, a time for questions afterwards. So what we're looking at today is the idea of trauma, recognizing that this is a time of global trauma, which is, you know, I would imagine the first time in any of our living histories that we've come across something like this, and reflecting on what it means to be a helper during a time of global trauma. And I'm going to spend a little time just exploring with you what exactly happens when we're traumatized, what happens in our brains and our bodies, because understanding that process really helps us to deal with it in more effective ways. So Bessel van der Kolk, who is kind of a global expert on trauma, Google him, he's fabulous. He's got this definition of trauma, and it's really about, you know, when it's about what happens in your brain and in your body when you feel at risk, when you feel threatened or in danger, and when you're in a situation when you feel that you're in danger, but you have limited capacity to do anything about it, so you feel trapped in that dangerous situation, that will escalate the feeling of trauma. And the thing that we need to really understand about trauma is that even when the dangerous situation or perceived dangerous situation has ended, trauma still lives on in our bodies and in our brains, but particularly in our bodies, and affects us in ways that are sometimes not always helpful. So understanding what's going on can help us to deal with it. Trauma can be caused by immediate fear, so a threatening situation like someone trying to attack you, or being in a car accident or something like that. But it can also be caused by chronic fear, and that's something that we need to be more aware of, because chronic fear by its very nature, because it's happening all the time, is something we tend not to notice that we're dealing with. So chronic fear could be something like some of my clients who are living in situations with an unsafe person, and so they're at risk all the time and in fear all the time. It could be at a lower level, living in a global pandemic where there's a risk of illness. So what happens in our brain and our body when we are responding to trauma? I'm going to try and keep this brief and simple. It's a bit of a rabbit hole. It's fascinating. If you want to find out more about it, please do. But in a very brief way, you've got your autonomic nervous system, and that's split into two. So you've got your parasympathetic nervous system, which the idea is that that's the bit that's activated most of the time. That takes care of your kind of unconscious processes that keep you alive, but you don't have to think about it. So things like your breathing, your heartbeat, your digestive system, that's all run by that. The sympathetic nervous system is what happens, what's activated when that part of our brain, the amygdala, that responds to danger, perceives that we're in a dangerous situation, and it activates the sympathetic nervous system. So the idea is that that's only activated temporarily, and that will flood your body with hormones and create changes in your body and in your brain function. We're going to talk about in a second. If you don't like long words, I see you, you are my people. I tend to call it safe mode and danger mode. Neurobiologists probably wouldn't be very happy with me for doing that, but my clients seem to prefer it. So, so safe mode and danger mode. So when we're in danger mode, when our sympathetic nervous system's been activated, what happens is the first thing that happens is your brain shuts down, which obviously nowadays is not very helpful. We've evolved like that because you don't really need your empathy skills when you're running away from a saber-toothed tiger, and our bodies haven't really evolved since those times. But so your higher functioning shuts down. Same thing happens when you're angry as well, actually, funny enough. That's I'm not going to go into that now because we don't have time, but it's very fascinating. And then your heart rate and your breathing increase because your body wants to get blood and oxygen to all those organs so that you can either fight or flee. So it's the fight or flight response. I'm calling it the fight or flight response, but actually there are 5 Fs. I don't know if any of you know what they are. I give you the first 2 because we all know those, fight and flight, but actually they're not the most common ones to be activated. The most common one to be activated is the freeze response. It's far more common. And the other 2 are friend, which is basically when you just do exactly what you're told. And that's sort of quite common if some of my clients who have been attacked or assaulted, they just do exactly what they're told. It might not stop the assault, but it can keep them alive through it. And then the other one is flop, which is similar to freeze, but it's basically when your body gets so overwhelmed with all the stress hormones that it just goes like a rag doll in it, and you kind of almost faint. But the most common response is the freeze response. When our brain is activated in the danger mode, the way memories are formed and stored is different. And that's something we need to be aware of, that with trauma memories, we don't have a sense of the passage of time. So I can remember something nice that happened, like on a holiday a couple of years ago. I can remember being in Corsica, it was lovely. But I remember that it happened a long time ago. I have a sense it happened a long time ago. With trauma memories, I don't have that sense of the passage of time. So my body is responding as though it's happening now, as though I'm in danger right now. And what we need to be thinking about as helpers during this time is that trauma responses can be re-triggered. And they can be re-triggered by the perception of danger. It doesn't necessarily have to be actual danger. So you'll see things like, war veterans reacting to a car backfiring. things like that. Feeling overwhelmed. And I'm sure a lot of you, I know I have, that your workloads have really increased over the pandemic. And I don't know if any of you experienced this, that when you're feeling really overwhelmed, you freeze. You actually can't function because you freeze. And you might wonder why. Well, now you know why. It's a trauma response. It's a low-level trauma response, but there's stuff we can do about it, so it's okay. Memories of a traumatic incident, and obviously when that happens in really intense ways, that's a flashback. Sensory triggers, so it could be like a smell or something, and sometimes you're not even aware consciously that you've sensed that trigger, but it will trigger the trauma response. And then the one that's really important for us as helpers is other people's trauma. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about secondary trauma or vicarious trauma. And that's something that we need to be really aware of, particularly at this time. We're more susceptible to secondary trauma if our resilience is low, and there's all sorts of things that could go into that, not looking after ourselves properly, not having enough sleep, all sorts of things that can go into low resilience. If we don't have the opportunity to offload and talk to other people, and that's why, you know, those helplines, they're not for you to wait until you're in crisis. It's really important to keep talking, talk to your colleagues, talk to the helplines if you need to. And if we don't feel supported or valued as we support others, so obviously if you're line managing volunteers, it's really important to check that they feel valued in the work that they do, because that will help prevent secondary trauma. So obviously as helpers, who are also human beings with past histories, with our own issues and problems and lives, we have to be aware of the balance. As caring people, we tend to find it very easy to focus, I think, on the needs of the people we're supporting. But we have to be aware of that balance, that we are both helpers and also humans with needs. And so that balance, sometimes it's going to be like this, where you know, the focus is going to be on our ability, our role as helpers and our ability to help other people. But sometimes something might happen that shifts that balance. And that might be a loved one becoming ill. It might be a global pandemic. It might be something else happening in our lives that means that we have to take care of ourselves and put our own oxygen mask on first. It's a hackneyed phrase. Some of my clients laugh at me because I say it so often, but it's so important. You know, when you're on a plane and they're giving you the safety instructions, and they talk about what happens when the oxygen masks come down, you have to put your own mask on first before helping other people. There's a very good reason for that, because we're no good to anybody if we're not fit to be a helper. And so ways that we can do that are things like letting it out. Holding stuff in is never a healthy option. So by talking or by writing, keeping a journal is a really fantastic thing to do, particularly during a time like this. Talking to your colleagues, talking to family members, if that doesn't break confidentiality, obviously. Talking to yourself. Anything like that, having boundaries, learning to say no, learning to ask for your needs, spending time in nature. That's something I haven't been doing enough of lately. If it is part of your spirituality, spending time in meditation or prayer, listening to music, dancing, singing. Spotify has been my friend during the pandemic, and creating moments of joy, which is really important, because that is to do with living in the present moment and really being fully experiencing the present moment. And that is a reversal of that time machine effect that trauma has. And so some of the ways we can do that is mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness. Mindfulness is really unparalleled in terms of helping us to really experience fully the present moment. And when we're able to do that with the practice of gratitude as well, and if it is your spirituality, if you were able to do that in a prayerful way as well, that can be incredibly powerful. And also, if you find yourself really powerfully dissociating from the present moment, there are grounding exercises, things like just looking around you, counting how many blue things you can see, how many red things you can see, things that don't use a lot of brain power because your brain has switched off largely because of the trauma response, but that actually bring you back to the present moment and your present safe surroundings. And then lastly, one of the things we can do is to activate our safe mode, our parasympathetic nervous system. One of the really powerful ways we can do that is through physical exercise, because it literally tricks your brain into thinking that you have fought or fled. So the stress hormones dissipate. It also releases positive hormones in itself. So if you're physically able to do that, then regular exercise is fantastic. And then the other one is 7-11 breathing, which some of you might know about because I talk about this a lot. It's based on the principle that the out breath activates your parasympathetic nervous system. And so if your out breath is longer than your in breath, and if you're able to take a moment just to breathe in and then really slowly. The idea is if you count 7 breathing in and 11 breathing out, and repeat that, you can use shorter numbers as long as the out breath is longer, that will actually activate your parasympathetic nervous system. And for chronic stress, for chronic sort of trauma responses, chronic overwhelm, that's something that you can do daily, and a very powerful way to look after yourself. I'm going to stop there because I don't want to go too much over time.